start the first of the many topics that we're going to be talking about in Proverbs, and we are talking today about the fool. I like it. And the fool is a really important one to talk about as a first topic before we get into the other topics, and we'll learn about why that is, but I think this is going to be a fun one for us to go over today. But what I want us to remember is, if you were here for our intro, I said something that we need to kind of remember, and I may point us back here a few times as we go through this series, is that it's going to be really easy as we look through the different topics in Proverbs to think of other people. You know, I said the fool, and some of you already started thinking about other people in your life that you may think are foolish. But what I want us to do during this series is resist the urge to look outward and begin to look inward. Let's be introspective in our hearts during this time and think, man, Lord, where have I played the fool in my life? And you'll get some fun life experience of where I have played the fool in my life, and we'll be able to go from there. But we'll start off just talking about who is the fool. There are several words used in Hebrew that we translate into fool. And some of them are used a lot of times, like 150 times in Proverbs. This is an extensive topic talked about in the book of Proverbs. And as we talk about all of our other topics, we will see the fool continue to reemerge their ugly head throughout the series, because in a lot of the things that we do and a lot of the ways that we live, we see that the fool continually reemerges as somebody that we need to think about and somebody that just does not want to go away. And so the first thing in who the fool, if we wanted to capture in society, we can say that the fool is, in one word, a menace, somebody that we don't like to have around. In Proverbs chapter 17, verse 12, it says this: "Let a man meet a she-bear robbed of her cubs, rather than a fool in his folly." Any Discovery Channel people here, you know that you do not take away the cubs from the mother bear, because what will happen when you do that? You will get mauled, and you may die from that mauling. And what I love about Proverbs is some of the Proverbs, and we're going to see this just continue to get funnier and funnier as we go on into some of the topics, is some of them are just like outrageously comical in kind of the comparisons that we make. And so we start off with, it is better basically to meet a mama bear who just got robbed of her cubs than it is to meet a fool in his folly. See, the reason is because there are so many things that the fool does that you do not want to get caught up in the fool's lifestyle. So the fool shows no restraint. In Proverbs chapter 20, verse 3, it says, "It is an honor for a man to keep aloof from strife," or away from strife, "but every fool will be quarreling," meaning that the fool is constantly getting into fights, into arguments, is fighting with other people, whether that physically, verbally, whatever, emotionally. The fool is constantly getting into these battles with others. They are quick to anger. In Proverbs 12, verse 16, it says, "The vexation of a fool is known at once, but the prudent ignores an insult." Are you one of those people that wear your emotions on your face, and as soon as somebody says something, you just like, there are some people that I know right away if I offended them. They don't have to say anything. Their eyebrows just need to do, a little bit something. But there are some of us that the moment somebody says something, we don't allow any time. We just react. Everybody knows the second that we get mad or our vexation is known at once. The fool that has a family Basically, Proverbs says, woe to that family. It stinks to have a fool in your family because you cannot disown them. They are always around. They will bring sorrow, it says in Proverbs 17:21. They will bring bitterness to those around them in 17:25. They will bring calamity on their family in 19:13. And yet still we'll see in Proverbs 15:20 that the fool, even though they bring bitterness, calamity, and sorrow on their loved ones, they still despise them. What a life and world to be in. But the thing about the fool, it is not only the family that a fool will bring down, but everyone who is in their company. Proverbs 13:20 says this, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. The companion of fools will suffer harm. So if you are around somebody and they are a fool, guess what? You will suffer harm from the company that you keep. Now, there's a difference between going to the sinner and trying to witness to the sinner and outreach to the sinner and be on mission with the sinner and keeping company with the foolish. There's a difference there because Jesus tells us to go to the sinner. He tells us to go to the ones who have sinned and not done what is right in his eyes so that we can witness, and we see that in his own life where he sits with the tax collector, he sits with the prostitute, he goes to the homes of sinners constantly. But when we keep a fool as company, the one who talks too much, doesn't listen well, always thinks that they are right, what happens is we begin to become like them. Even though we've read all of these things about the fool and who the fool is, there is a crowning craziness of the fool. And this is where we're going to land. Because as I read through all the Proverbs on this topic, there was one thing that it kept coming back to over and over and over and over again. And that is the fool's inability to receive good things, namely correction, advice, understanding, and wisdom. Whenever someone comes to try to give these things to the fool always has one response. And this is where we really see the downfall, why a fool will stay a fool. In Proverbs 17:10, it says this, a rebuke goes deeper into a man of understanding than 100 blows into a fool. A rebuke goes deeper into a man of understanding than 100 blows into a fool. So the fool does not receive correction. I can't talk about this enough today. We've read in James, when we were going through our series in James, and we've already lightly talked about how humility is one of the most prized character traits of a godly woman or a godly man. The inability to receive correction from somebody is to think basically that you have arrived. To be full of pride and essentially be opposed by God. Our natural response that we have towards criticism is defensiveness. When someone comes and corrects us, a lot of times we will land in a place of being defensive. Oh, well, you got it wrong. That wasn't me. No, you're just not hearing right. Or pointing outward. Well, actually, did you know it was Sally's fault? That wasn't my fault. I remember I was talking to somebody that has employees under them, and after a few years of talking to this person, I had begun to see a pattern that every time they hired somebody new, in 6 months, the employee would quit or get fired. And I sat down, and every time I talked to the person, it was the same story. Oh, they weren't good enough. They kept on messing everything up. Everything was in disarray or disorder. And after about the 6th employee, I just had to kind of throw this out there. And I was like, did you ever think that maybe it was how you were managing them rather than that the 6 people that you've hired and fired or have quit are incompetent? That doesn't align properly. But it's always somebody else's fault. No, this has nothing to do with me. It has to do with them. We don't allow patterns to emerge. I remember when this happened to me, I always say, like, my pre-Jesus days is I was incredibly insecure. And how my insecurity manifested itself a lot of times was defensiveness. And so defensiveness and insecurity are just 2 sides of the same coin. And so how this would happen is when I was in Bible school, we had preaching classes. And, when I was in Bible school, the head pastor for the Bible school had just this special ability to just like, man, if you had any ounce of pride, you were just not going to survive there. I had seen it over and over again where people would come and, some of the ways that they removed pride I look back on may have been unhealthy. It was like relentless making fun of somebody that you knew something like was, sticking home until they finally broke and walked away from that. And so in Bible school, I remember we had preaching classes, and they would always give you feedback after your preaching class. We would go up, we would preach whatever we would preach, our 20-minute sermonettes, and then we would sit down. And then at the end of class, we would give each other feedback. The person in charge, our professor, would give us feedback. At this point, we had gone through maybe 4 or 5 preaching classes, and the feedback that I was getting, I just felt like, this is ridiculous. Like, how is this feedback helping me? I just felt like it was overly critical, and it wasn't kind, and all of these things. And it was because my defensive nature, my insecurity was rising up, and I wanted to be the top of the class. And every time I preached, there was just something that they would tell me. It was just like, Justin, this was awful, and this is why it was awful. And so I remember one time I get up, we're doing another preaching class, and I do my 20-minute preaching spiel, and then I sit down, and the pastor at that point decides he was going to give feedback on the spot. And so as soon as I sit down, whenever you get feedback on the spot in this setting, it was not a good thing. And he gives me his feedback on the spot, and man, it was not good. I honestly do not remember what I said. Thank God I don't remember what I said. But I just remember getting so irate that I hit like my defensiveness and my cap for kindness just couldn't go together anymore. And my insecurity won the day, and I literally just started screaming at the pastor in the middle of class. I just started screaming at him, and I was just like, I don't think I cursed at him. I think I would have been in a lot more trouble than I was at the time. But I just became incredibly irate, and I was just like, what the heck is your problem? Why are you always bringing us down, blah, blah, blah. And, if you've ever been in that moment and you're not the person, like, upset and angry, it's just like everybody else kind of just shrunk in their seat, like, a little bit of an overreaction much. And it was because all of this pent-up frustration and anger and insecurity finally could not take it anymore and blew the lid, and I was going to make sure that this guy heard a piece of my mind. And so after I was done screaming at him, I did a quick survey of the room, and I was like, okay, everybody thinks I'm crazy. And so I just storm out of the place, and I leave. And I was interning in the church at that point, and so I go to my office. I didn't even go back to the class, and it was just, I didn't want to be in the awkwardness. You ever have a blow up and you're just like, I can't be here anymore because everybody's going to be thinking about what I just did, and I don't want to be in the same room as them. And so I go to my office. A few hours later, somebody comes and he gives me a note. He says, hey, there was the pastor of our Bible school and then the pastor of the church who was over, the senior pastor over all of the other guys, like, hey, senior pastor wants to talk to you. And I was just like, oh, I don't want to talk about this right now. Like, I just don't. Because the sin in my heart was glaring at that point. There was the insecurity, the defensiveness had really had its final straw, and we all knew it was going to happen. So kind of just like walking head down to his office, and I get in, and the pastor I screamed at is there, and the senior pastor is there, and the pastor I screamed at, kindly just sitting quietly in the corner, and the senior pastor goes, Justin, we've noticed a pattern in your life, and that you are very defensive, and we see deep insecurity. The pastor just said something very simple. He said, do you know that God can heal you of your insecurity? And man, I remember I just started crying because I realized that I did not believe that God healed. I did not believe that God can free me of the foolish behavior in my life, that I constantly was living a life in my head and not always out loud of insecurity, but they finally brought it to the forefront of out loud. And I remember that night God did something significant in my heart because I finally had faith that, man, God can heal me of some of the wounds in my heart. And that also taught me another helpful lesson, because I realized correction may not always come in helpful ways. To this day, even though I was wrong, I thought there were better ways to bring correction out than they did it. But sometimes we will experience criticism in our life. We will have, right, everybody loves to talk about their haters. Right, people that are, man, anything I do, whether good or bad, they always got something to say. Or maybe somebody at work is incessantly talking about you to your boss, or maybe to your face, or to other people, or there's somebody close to you that's just like, man, I can never do anything right in this person's eyes. Sometimes correction may not come in helpful ways, but I've learned that even in harmful criticism, I can find truth that will help me refine who I am. See, a lot of times what we'll do is we know that there's harmful criticism out there, and so whenever we receive correction, we always put it in a category of like, this is not good, this is harmful, this is bad. I don't want that negativity in my life. Good vibes only. I don't accept any of these bad vibes that are coming out of your mouth right now. Don't you know I am perfection? I am the greatest thing since Adam and Eve. Like, there is no one better than me. And you just got to deal with my bad things and pretend it doesn't stink. But what I want us is, I want us to live a life where we can drop excuses. Because over and over again, we see in Proverbs that the fool does not receive correction, does not receive rebuke. And I see that this is part of how we live in our culture these days, where a lot of times people's intentions or internal excuses rob us from growing through correction and even criticism. And so sometimes people will say something in a mean way and or a bad way, but there's still some truth in what they said. And so a practice of the wise is to listen to what someone says, sift out, all right, they may have said it harmfully, but did they say anything that was true? Is there anything in here that could possibly, was there a misinterpretation of my words? Was there a miscommunication? Could I have said something better? Could I have done it a better way? Could I have been, kinder in this situation or more patient in this situation? Because what happens is when we close off our hearts to correction, when we close off our hearts to rebuke and even criticism, then the fool in us begins to get stronger and stronger, because only the fools do not receive correction. In Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." Fools do not listen to advice. And I want to invite you into a very funny moment in my life when I did not listen to advice. You're about to go on a crazy train story with me. This was right after I graduated high school, right? As I feel like your teenage years are at the pinnacle of I know it best and I know it the most, and nobody is going to teach me better. And so, I've just graduated high school, and for those of you that haven't labeled me a nerd yet, you're about to label me a nerd now. I had played in high school. My addiction of choice was video games. I played video games endlessly. I played as soon as I got home from school till I went to sleep, and I would wake up early in the morning to play before I went to school. And I remember I would play online games, and this was before, it was, I don't know if there's ever a time where, it was a lot more, taboo to meet people that you had met online. Nowadays, you meet your wife or your husband online, and nobody bats a second eyelash, and that's fine. But back then, that was not a thing that people did, especially in my age. So I graduate high school. I'm about to be shipped off to Ohio for a year. And I know that I'm going to stop playing this game that I've been playing basically every single day for the last 3 years. I talked to these people for hours and hours every day. So I decide I'm going to take a Greyhound bus to Pennsylvania to meet people that I had never met in person before. And yes, you're about to enjoy an experience with me. And so I told some of my friends, and even some of my friends at that point were just like, Justin, that doesn't sound right. And I remember thinking, my parents will never in a million, I don't even think they still know to this day that I did this. I was just thinking, my parents never in a million years. I saw their advice before, and you ever know someone's advice before you ask them, so you just bypass and think, yeah, I'm just not going to ask them. I already know what they're going to say. So I already knew what my parents were going to say. I had gotten some graduation money, and I told my parents, I was like, listen, some of my friends from high school, they are chipping in and getting a cabin in Pennsylvania, so I'm going to be away for 2 days. And so, I didn't do a lot to not earn my parents' trust. So I manipulated the trust that I had in order to go away for a night. And so I purchased a Greyhound ticket. I get on a bus, and I begin to go to somebody I had never met, their house party for a day. And I remember when I get there, I got into this person's house, and it was like one of my first experiences with rural America. I remember I went into his house, and I realized, I was like, there's nowhere to put my stuff because there's literally things everywhere. I mean, everywhere. It was one of the most dirty, houses that I had ever seen in my life. So I was like, okay, I'll just leave my stuff in the backyard. I don't know why you invited me to spend the night. There's nowhere to sleep. There's nowhere to go. And okay, this is going to be interesting. So I get into the backyard, and as I get into the backyard, his uncle rolls in with 2 just huge kegs of beer, and they are ready to get this party started. So I start introducing myself to people, and I just, incredibly ill-prepared for the journey that was about to happen. So I meet some of these people that I've been talking to for the past few years online. We're talking about nerdy things like video games and the things that had happened over the last few years in this game. And then my friend, this guy, he was like, okay, we're going to take the party to my uncle's house. And I'm like, okay, it's like 7 o'clock. It's dark or getting dark. And I'm like, where does your uncle live? He's like, he lives about a half an hour from here. So everybody starts packing into cars. I pack into this guy's car, his uncle, his uncle's friend, him, his girlfriend, me in the back. And while we're driving there, the guy in the front pulls out a blunt. And he just lights it in the car, and all the windows are up. And I'm like, okay, I don't think this is good right now. And so he takes a hit, and then he passes it to the uncle who's driving the car. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm just sitting in the back like, God, I don't know what the heck I just got myself into. So they pass it around. It gets to me. I'm like, no, that's all right. And they keep passing it around the car. And this guy is now speeding down these pitch black streets in the middle of Pennsylvania where there's nobody there. And we pass a truck. 5 minutes down the road, this truck, one of those huge pickup trucks that you see in PA, speeds past us to an intersection, pulls over, and blocks the street. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. So we stop the car. His uncle and his uncle's friend get out of the car. I just kind of get out of the car and go to the back. Apparently, they were mad that we cut them off. And so they start threatening our life. I mean, they are just like, like, we're going to kill you. I have a gun in the car. And I'm in Pennsylvania, so I'm like, this guy probably does have a gun in the car. And, there's like 5 big dudes that get out of the truck. And like, here I am, a teenager. My friend's a teenager. If you think I'm skinny now, I was about 15 pounds lighter back then. And so very scrawny. And this guy's uncle was not a big guy. He was like 5'3", and they start screaming at each other, and they're both threatening to kill each other at this point. And the friend starts coming back to the trunk, and I'm like, dang, what is he going to get out of the trunk? He pops the trunk, and then all I see is my zone goes right to the uncle screaming at this one guy, and he says, if you don't effing shut up, I'm going to kill you right now. You better shut up. And the guy just keeps on screaming at him. He's like, you better shut up. Guy keeps screaming at him. I'm like, God, just shut up. He's like, you better shut up. Keeps screaming at him, and then all of a sudden, he headbutts him in the face. The other guy had just got to the car, pulls out a bat, and then starts running out, and I look at my friend, and my friend, this is his uncle, right? And he did nothing. He just stood there, and I was like, bro, this is your family, and you're not doing anything, and there's 5 guys beating up these 2 guys right here, so I'm not going to do anything. So I sit back. I was like, if you ain't going to even jump in for family, I don't know these people, I only know you, I'm not jumping in. So these 5 guys beat these 2 people to tar, throw them in the woods, get in the car, and then leave. And then they like kind of get out, straggling, get in the car, relight another blunt, and then start driving back to the house. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? We get to this guy's house, the party just getting started. More people start coming. They bring out the ping pong table for beer pong. Everybody's smoking, craziness. I mean, I've never seen something like this in my life. It was absolute mayhem. The uncle, he takes me to the basement. At this point, I was like, I had enough. I'm in the basement. I'm by myself. My introvert self, didn't know what was going on. And so I'm sitting in the basement. He comes down. He goes, Justin, he's already pretty drunk. He goes, it is my mission tonight to get you drunk. And I was like, okay. He's like, you're in my house, so these are my rules. And so he went and got some Grey Goose from the refrigerator, puts a shot glass on the table, fills up one for himself, gets another one, fills it up for me. He takes it and he says, now you better take that right now. I'm going to hurt you. And I was like, okay. Took the shot, put it down on the table. So then, now mind you, I've never had liquor in my life at this point. And I was like, what the hell is going on in my... There's this burning sensation in my chest. And so then he fills up both shot glasses again, and I say a prayer at this point. I know I'm far outside of the grace of God in my life. And I'm just like, God, please, I don't want to get drunk tonight. Can you get this man out of here? And so all of a sudden somebody calls him. They're like, I don't remember his name. And he's like, oh, we'll finish this later. And I was like, I hope we don't. So he leaves the room. He goes up. And the party just keeps on getting crazier. At some point, I'm looking at people where they're using the bathroom in their house, and I'm like, that's not a toilet, but okay. There's this one guy that went outside to use the bathroom and never came back. They found him asleep in the bushes, the next morning. I mean, this is so I'm like, all right, I had enough. I go into the guy's house. I'm just like, I don't know where to go to sleep. So I get my book bag, and I just fall asleep in his living room. I wake up the next morning. Everybody's kind of waking up. They called a pizza delivery person, and this is where I was like, what a crazy, this is nuts. The pizza delivery, they call Domino's, right? They all order pizza. They all got munchies from the night before. The delivery guy comes, and they're all sitting around in a circle, and I don't know how this conversation happened, but all I know is the delivery guy goes, give me 1 second. He runs to his car and comes back with a huge bag of weed. And then sits down for a half an hour and smokes weed with all of them while he eats the pizza that he just delivered. And I'm just like, seriously, this is the craziest thing I've ever experienced in my life. And I remember this was in 2 days, I was going to Ohio after this. And the whole point of me going to Ohio was for me to figure out whether God was real or not. But I was like, God, thank you for this experience. Before I went, because I remember getting on the Greyhound going home, getting my house. My parents asked, how was the trip with your friends? And I was just like, oh, we had a great time. Nothing really happened, and I just go lay in my bed just thinking, what? And I'm just happy that I'm home and I am alive. And now this may seem over the top of an analogy, but a lot of times we may not get ourselves in physical situations like that, but we get ourselves in spiritual, we get ourselves in emotional, and even physical crazy situations because we have played the fool in our life and we just don't listen to advice. We just don't listen to, there are reasons why people say don't do this. The reason why people say don't do this and they say this isn't good for you is because maybe they've been there, done that. And they know you can learn from my foolishness, how you don't have to live a life of foolery. Or they have seen other people walk this life and they've seen where the path has led. God's mercy on me was not giving me what I deserved that weekend. And many, many times over. I should have gotten beat up. She should have crashed. I should have been drunk, and God knows what would have happened after that. But he had mercy on me, and I thank God. There may be times in your life where you have done some foolish stuff, and you can look back and say, God, you had mercy on me. If you wonder what mercy is when you don't get something you deserve. So there may be things that you've done in your life that were really foolish, and you deserve the fruit, to eat the fruit of what you've done, but you didn't get it. That was God having mercy on you. But our culture has sayings like this, like, I'm going to do me. And these sayings rip through all of us, and it's just like when I hear stuff like that, I'm thinking, do you know what you're saying? You are broadcasting your foolishness to the world. When you say, I'm going to do me, because other people are telling you you shouldn't do that, but you're still going to do what you want to do. You want to do what you think is best. What you are broadcasting is you're really saying, well, I'm just a fool. I'm going to live the life of a fool. How many times have I said, I know better than them. I know better than what they're going to do. I know better than who they are, and I am going to do me. And every time I found myself in foolish situations, one after another. In Proverbs 12:15, it says, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. And this is the crowning achievement of the fool. The fool does what is right in their own eyes. This is the very center of foolish living. It's why we reject advice. It's why we don't receive correction. And we see that how this plays out in the sin of Israel. The sin of Israel in the book of Judges, as you read the book, it becomes very, very clear. In the very beginning of the book of Judges, you get great judges. They listen to God, they judge justly, and they lead the people in the right way. But one after another, you begin to realize that there's a pattern. That not only is there another judge that comes along, but each and every judge that comes along seems to twist more and more Scripture and not know who God is. And more you see that they live more sinful behaviors and sinful lives. And it all culminates to Samson, who lived an incredibly addicted, lustful, non-God-fearing life. And so after Samson, there's this saying that repeats itself over and over again in Judges. And it's this, that everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And what Judges is speaking about is it's speaking about the nation of Israel, where everybody began to do what was right in their own eyes. And what happens after that is, if you think my story was crazy, then I want to encourage you, go home, read Judges 17 to 20. And what you will read is one of the craziest stories that you will ever read in your entire life. It is crazier than really, I think, anything that Hollywood has put out. I mean, it goes through a story of murder, of civil war, of rape, of sexual abuse. It is absolutely mind-blowing that when you're reading this is a story of the people of God. But yet here they were, living as fools because everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And this is the spirit of the age today. That when we hear advice, when we hear wisdom, when we read Scripture, we take it with a grain of salt. And when we read Scripture, we think, I will read that, but I will only listen to it if it aligns with what I like and what I want to do. I will listen to your advice only if I like what you have to say. See, a lot of times when we look for advice, what we're doing is we're not actually looking for advice. We're looking for people to affirm what we've already established in our heart to do. And what happens is when we begin to live out this life that we do what is right in our own eyes, then we live the life of a fool. We bring destruction, calamity, and craziness in every angle with us. Romans 1 says this, that when we do what is right in our own eyes, that this is how God will respond. He will give us over to our passions. See, a lot of people talk about the wrath of God, and they talk about maybe, man, I'm going to be struck by lightning. Or, when I come into church, I'm just going to be enveloped in a ball of fire. Or God is just going to throw me, a million feet into the sea. And everybody will forget me. But really, that is not the worst that can happen. The worst that can happen, as we read in Romans 1, is God can leave you to exactly what you want to do. God can say, you know what? You desire these things. You go against the ways that I have called you to live. You go against the ways that I have called you to be. You know my word. You hear my word, but you do not do my word. Okay, hands off. I will give you over. I will give you over to your lust. I will give you over to your desires. I will give you over to your dreams. I will give you over to your goals. And let me tell you, that is the scariest place to be. There are a few times in my life where I have been in habitual sin and I began to no longer sense conviction. And let me tell you, those have been some of the scariest times. Because I think, God, you're giving me over now to this. Your Spirit is no longer drawing me back. And it's just kind of this speechlessness of, man, if you're letting me be, I don't know how I'm going to live. God will say that if you want it so bad, you can have it. See, the culmination of the fool is to think that we are wiser than God. That we know better than him. That even though he's the creator, even though he is the one that essentially wrote the instruction guide or the manual, if you want to live well, do this. We say, actually, I know better. It's the classic example of the watch telling the watchmaker the watch knows what it should do best. We would see a scenario like that and think that's crazy. And that's what it looks like when we tell God, I know what is best for my life. I know how to live my life. I know what is good for me. Right? This feels good. This seems good. And what happens is when we do that is we are living the culmination of the fool in our life. And we are doing what is right in our own eyes. We are rejecting advice. We are not listening to correction. We are not allowing the wisdom and the understanding of people who have gone before us to speak into us. What we are saying is, actually, I am self-sufficient. I know what is good. I understand what is best, and I will do me. And the God that we serve is not actually the God of the Bible, but it is an idol that we have constructed in our own image, and we begin to bow down and praise ourselves rather than the creator of the heavens and the earth. Now, some of us have been living in our foolishness for a while, thinking it's just my way of life, like I was when I was insecure, and I thought, man, this is just who I'm always going to be. Maybe it's been that you've always had a fast temper. Maybe you've never been good at correction or receiving a rebuke. Maybe you just usually think you're right and you think everybody else is dumb around you. Maybe you just like to learn the hard way. You always have been somebody that pride yourself in going through the school of hard knocks. And the hard way was your way. But we read something last week that I want to bring our attention back to. And it's Proverbs chapter 8, verse 5. It says, "O simple ones, learn prudence. O fools, learn sense." See, the truth is that even if we have walked in foolish ways, wisdom is still calling to us. Wisdom is still searching us out. It is looking to find us. So even if we have said, well, this is the way that I have lived my life, these are the ways that I have thought about who I am, this is what I do, this is, in essence, we are saying this is who I am. Well, we have to learn something today. That we don't have to live this way our entire life. That we serve a God who is there at the very beginning, the very foundations of the earth, when all of the things that we have today were created, but he is also here with us now, ready to bring healing. I remember that night after I had given that sermon and shouted at the pastor and went to his office, and he told me, "Justin, you don't have to live like this anymore." I realized that I had thought this was part of my personality. This is who I was. For the rest of my life, I was going to live with this insecure voice in the back of my head that hated when people corrected me, did not listen to any criticism, and always became defensive whenever I was in an environment like that. And I thought, I will just live with this, but I will try to hide it. But something happened when that pastor said that to me, that I went back and I prayed, and there was a faith that God can heal. That this is actually not how he created me to be. That this is not who Justin Matera in the eyes of the Creator was. That when I looked in the mirror, I was still looking through the lens of myself, through my own worldly, fleshly eyes, but I had not begun to look at myself through the Creator's eyes, of someone who was actually confident in who he was created to be, who can listen to a criticism or a critique and not crumble apart because of it. Who didn't always have a nagging voice in the back of his head saying, I want everybody to like me all the time. And what happened that night in service during worship, as I went up to pray and to worship, I remember God going into my heart and bringing back all of these memories of my childhood. And it felt like somebody was sewing up different parts of my heart. And he was saying, you remember that? You're healed. You remember that? You're healed. And it was the craziest thing, because at that point, 18 years of brokenness, 18 years of doing things one way, 18 years of hearing people talk a certain way about me came and flashed one after another in my mind. And God said, I'm healing you of all this. You are no longer going to be this person. You are going to be who I have created you to be. And so it's really easy to look at the foolish things that we do in our life and think, man, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I have been doing this for a long time. There's no way I'm ever going to get over this habit or this behavior or be able to allow God to change my heart and who I am. And I want to dispel that right now. And say, God of the universe, creator of heavens and earth, you gave me life. You can heal my heart. Can you stand with me to pray?